Here's today's big question. Is Reform UK on the rocks? Well, that's what the Conservative Party are claiming today after Rupert Lowe MP, MP Rupert Lowe has said that Nigel Farage acts like a messiah and needs to learn how to delegate. And he also said that if there are not changes, then he would not be by Farage's side at the next election. It's an astonishing interview in the Mail today with Andrew Pearce, who of course also works at GB News. And to discuss it, I'm joined in the studio by our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, welcome to the show. So, there has been talk about potential rifts within Reform. Rupert Lowe, of course, is incredibly popular with the electorate, very outspoken, very wealthy, so he can say whatever he wants, doesn't even draw his salary. In fact,
well,
he gives it away.
Though, really. A grown-up party wouldn't let him say these things.
So that's the first point. Let's talk about today's interview with Andrew Pearce.
That's right.
With Rupert Lowe and the schism that seems to have caused.
So the Daily Mail says, interview with Andrew Pearce, who works for GB News 2. Rupert Lowe tells him it's too early to know whether Nigel will deliver the goods. He can only deliver if he surrounds himself with the right people. He says we have to start behaving as if we are leading and not merely protesting. Nigel is a messianic figure who's at the core of everything that we do. I've got some other quotes here we can put on the screen for viewers and listeners. He says also, I'm barely 6 months into being an MP. I'm in the betting to be the next Prime Minister, and that's because Elon Musk backs him. And the quote's on the screen as you see there. It's absolutely staggering, he says. I don't know where this has come from. He goes on, we have to start developing policy which is going to change the way we govern. I'm not going to be by Nigel's side at the next election unless we have a proper plan to change the way we govern from top to bottom. These are ultimatums in a party of just 5 MPs. And Rupert Lowe, to his credit, by the way, doesn't take any salary to be an MP. He's a self-made millionaire, we can call him that, I'm sure. He's someone who speaks from the lip. He is making a lot of the ground, the running ground, I think, in Parliament. This won't help Nigel Farage today.
He's also said, when he was specifically asked about the potential of a deal with the Conservatives, an electoral pact, which, of course, Nigel Farage has vehemently ruled out, Rupert Lowe said it's too early to say what will happen. You can't rule anything out. So another key policy split. And you're talking about another potential wobble earlier, and that is the Electoral Commission have got their funding figures out.
That's right. So there were 3 wobbles, I think, for Reform UK that we're reporting today. One about Rupert Lowe there, holding out a bit of flashing some ankle here towards the Tory party. Don't forget, both Kevin Baynor and Nigel Farage have said there can't be a merger, but below the line, we know Tory MPs talk about mergers. The first time we've heard the Reform MPs talk about it. That is fascinating. Will he try and do a deal behind the backs of Farage? We don't know. Some not great news on donations. Now, the Tory party raised £1.9 million in the past 3 months at the end of last year. Labour £1 million, Lib Dems 685,000. Reform at the bottom on 281,000 of those 4 parties. Put it differently, for every £1 raised by Reform, the Tory party raised £6. Now, I've got some quotes here from Reform UK. They say it's worth pointing out that they've gained over 70,000 members in the 4th quarter. So they are getting members, but the money, the big money, is going to the Tory party when they're on the floor.
And when you consider that only a short while ago, $100 million from Elon Musk, that came and went pretty quickly.
Never confirmed by Reform, mooted in reports.
Nick Candy, of course, then hove interview, promising to raise money. And the situation is such today that the Conservatives have issued, we need to move on, the Conservatives have issued a press release. And to talk about that now, I'm joined by the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Chris, welcome to the show. So you're saying here that Reform seems to be at warfare. Tell us more.
It does. Well, good afternoon. Even though Reform only have 5 MPs, they seem to have descended into factional infighting already, with Rupert Lowe questioning Nigel Farage's leadership qualities, saying it's not clear whether or not he has what it takes. And Rupert Lowe described the Reform Party as a protest party with a Messianite leader. And I suppose that is what some people have been thinking quietly for a while now, that it is a protest party with a Messianite leader. Good slogans, I'll give them that. I'll say that much. They got good slogans. But have they got, what it takes to develop a proper plan for government? And I don't think they do. It's clear listening to debates in Parliament. that they don't. I mean, thinking, for example, about the border security bill that Labour introduced, or the border surrender bill, as it might better be known. I was there debating that bill, coming up with a critique of it, coming up with new ideas to clamp down on immigration, legal and illegal. And so were lots of Conservative MPs behind me, opposing this Labour government, coming up with concrete, tangible, detailed ideas. No Reform MP even attempted to make a speech in that debate. So when it comes to the serious work of opposing Labour and coming up with detailed, credible plans, they're just not there. And I think Rupert Lowe has now said out loud what it's been pretty obvious to everybody else.
Mr. Philp, of course, Nigel Farage and indeed Rupert Lowe may counter this by saying it's a bit rich for the Conservatives to talk of divisions. You're two parties within one. That's why you were annihilated at the last election. There's half the party, according to Mr. Farage, would be better off joining the Liberal Democrats. The wet Tories, as he called them, split on Brexit, split on net zero. Do you think you have your own divisions within your own party to worry about?
Well, look, there have been problems in the past, but those are behind us. The last election is behind us. We do, of course, have 20 times or 25 times more MPs than Reform do, but we are now united in a way that maybe wasn't the case in the past. If you think about it, since Kemi Badenoch became leader, in fact, since the general election, actually, we've been united. You haven't seen any of those splits that we had in the past because we're under new leadership. There's a new approach and we are a united party. And on issues like net zero, I think we're all clear on the Conservative side that we can't have a mad dash to wreck our economy by insisting on Ed Miliband's green madness that sees no more drilling in the North Sea. I mean, all of us agree, I think, that it's insane to end new exploration of oil and gas, particularly gas in the North Sea, and instead import it from other countries at vast expense. So we all agree that's a crazy idea. And people are paying the price of that in the form of higher bills and, businesses, particularly the businesses that use a lot of energy, like, chemicals plants, cement manufacturing, steel.
Mr. Philp, it would also be fair to point out that the Conservative Party had net zero targets in your election manifesto. It was the Tory party that introduced 85% taxes on British gas profits offshore. So you're also divided on that point. But look, I'm with our political editor, Chris Hope. He has a question for you.
OK. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for coming on Martin's show. A quick one. What do you think Nigel Farage should do about Rupert Lowe and his remarks about his leadership?
Well, I mean, we've seen leaders in the past, suspend people from the whip for saying that kind of thing. And we know, Nigel Farage, I imagine, will take a very dim view of it, won't he? Because this is open defiance of his leadership by Rupert Lowe there. So we'll see, won't we, what Nigel Farage is made of.
Well, there's a
big
challenge.
They're clearly riven by divisions, and Rupert Lowe has admitted that Reform is nothing more than a protest party that doesn't have the plans needed to fix our country's very, very serious problem, including on immigration.
To be fair to Rupert Lowe, is he not doing his thinking out loud here? He talks about the don't rule out a merger with the Tory party at the next election. Is that not the reality of what everyone is telling me behind the scenes? And would you say that now publicly? A Tory Reform UK merger is surely possible, at least, at the next election.
No, well, that's not our plan at all. And
not your plan, but it may happen.
It's not our intention. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it needs to happen either, because as obviously Rupert Lowe has come to this realization that Reform is a protest party that doesn't have a plan. Rupert Lowe has come to that realization pretty quickly because he's obviously inside it in Parliament every day. As the public think about it some more, they're going to reach the same conclusion that Richard Lowe has, that Reform is divided, doesn't have a plan, it's just a protest party. And as the public realise that, I think the Conservatives will be able to demonstrate that we've learned from the mistakes we made in the past, and we did make mistakes in the past. Immigration was too high. That was wrong. It was a mistake. And we're now taking a different approach. So as we lay out detailed policies, and we've laid out a few already, like the hard cap on migration, I think the public will see we've got a plan that will fix these problems and kick out this terrible Labour government. And people will realise that we can't have a repeat of what happened last July, when voting Reform handed Labour a massive, massive majority, which Starmer is now using to give away the Chagos Islands, or in fact pay to give them away, hitting pensioners with winter fuel payments, hitting farmers, putting up tax on business, surrendering control of our borders. Unfortunately, by voting, a few people, voting Reform last July, has put Starmer in power with a landslide. And I think people will realise we just cannot have that again. So we are fighting the next election to win it on our own.
Chris, does it have legs anymore to say a vote for Reform is a vote for the Labour Party? People voted, a lot of them stayed at home because they saw year after year, election after election, the Conservatives didn't deliver what you promised on things like immigration. Over 1 million came in last year. This is way, way up. Small boat crossings, stop the boats was a 3-word phrase which never bore any fruit, apart from 2 voluntary people going to Rwanda. And so it's easy, is it not, in opposition to criticise what you should have done in power? And you can criticise Nigel Farage, but his popularity is far higher than Kemi Badenoch's at the moment. And a lot of people are saying, by the way, that Rupert Lowe is more Conservative than any of the Conservative MPs.
Well, you haven't met my colleagues or, heard what I think about immigration. Well, I'll start telling you now. So look, we made mistakes. The Conservatives made mistakes on immigration. Those legal migration figures were far, far, far too high. That should never have been allowed to happen. It was a mistake, and it was wrong.
But it did happen. It happened in every election since 2010.
Let me just finish the point. So late in the Conservatives' time in office, too late, admittedly, but late in the time in office, changes were made to increase all the salary thresholds and stop a lot of family members coming in. And the numbers are now declining quite significantly. The number of visas being issued are declining very substantially as those policies take effect. Now, that was too little, it was too late, but it was done, and it is now getting these numbers down. But we need to go further. And let me tell you 2 of the ways, as an example, we need to go further. One is we need to have a binding legal cap on migration set by Parliament. And when
David Cameron said that in 2010.
So Cameron did it for non-EU citizens, and it worked for non-EU citizens. The cap was 20,000, and it actually worked. So we'd do the same thing, except for everybody, not just for non-EU, for everybody. You set a cap, and when the cap is reached, you just stop giving out any more visas.
So why didn't you do that in 14 years in power?
And Cameron did do it for
it's a great idea. But why didn't you do
it? Obviously, while we were in the European Union and during the transition period, we couldn't do it for Europeans because of the EU rules. There was a period of about 3 or 4 years at the end when it could have been done, but wasn't. And that was a mistake. That was wrong. We got that wrong. And Kemi and I have said we will. In fact, we're going to put down an amendment to this border bill next week, which will set out the mechanism for having a vote in Parliament each year. Now, I've done the work to develop that amendment, and we're going to table it next week. Reform haven't done that. No one else. Nigel Farage hasn't done that. Rupert Lowe hasn't done that. I have. We're doing the work, and the cap can be set at a low level. That's one example. Another example is we've said we should stop giving visas and stop giving indefinite leave to remain. That's when people can stay permanently, as the name implies, to people that come here, saying they're going to work, who then don't work. If that happens, they should have the work visa taken away.
But that's another thing you had 14 years to do and didn't. This is down to trust and competence. You're clearly competent. Can people trust you? This sounds like things you should have done in 14 years in power. You never did. And then you got thumped at the last election. And you're now desperately trying to convince the electorate who've went to Reform because they didn't trust the Conservatives to go back. What's changed? Why should they trust you now?
Because as Shadow Home Secretary, I have said, honestly and openly, and Kemi Badenoch has said as leader, have honestly and openly said the last government made mistakes and got things wrong. And you've just pointed out quite fairly and quite rightly, you've pointed out what some of those things were. So how do we win back trust? Well, firstly, by just making the honest admission that I just have. Secondly, by developing detailed and credible and specific ideas to fix these issues. And I just mentioned a couple of them, the binding visa cap, which I'm going to put down as an amendment to the bill next week and see if Labour vote for it. And I've mentioned the changes to indefinite leave to remain. They won't, probably no. We've got to beat them in an election before it'll happen. But let's put it to the vote in Parliament. And then I've mentioned, stopping people getting indefinite leave to remain, where they can stay here permanently if they come here saying they're going to work and then don't work, or even work at a low salary. Right? We're putting forward those detailed ideas. I know it's going to be tough to win back trust, but by coming up with these specific, properly thought through, carefully thought through ideas, I believe we can win back trust. And that is the difference between us and Reform. They're not doing that work, as Rupert Lowe has admitted today. They are just a protest party with slogans. They're good slogans. I'll give them that. They're good slogans. But fixing our country's problems needs more than slogans.
OK, thank you very much for joining us on the show today as the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp.